Thank you so much, Senator Cornyn, for putting this together, and thank you, Angela, for sharing your harrowing story. It's one that conjures horrific memories and experiences that no one should have to endure, and I'm so sorry you had to endure that, but thank you for sharing your story with America. National capitals are supposed to be a source of national pride. You think of Paris, Tokyo, you think of London. They all perform that. In many respects, our nation's capital does the same. This is a beautiful city with some amazing architecture. Our beautiful domed buildings, our marble colonnades, not to mention the layout of the city, the landscaping. There's so many things about it that are beautiful. But when those same beautiful domed buildings and marble colonnades share streets with open-air crime scenes, something has gone terribly wrong. Now, let's take a trip back through history for a minute, just to reorient ourselves around first principles surrounding this city. We have to remember that the Constitution itself doesn't mandate its existence. It doesn't mandate the place for the seat of our national government. During the early years of the Republic, our national capital has been housed, albeit temporarily, in Philadelphia and New York. In theory, if we wanted to, we could put our national capital somewhere else. But we do have authority to designate a national capital, which we've done by statute. That authority comes under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution. But it's put in there with may language, not shall, that we may designate a city to serve as our nation's capital. And it says something important, that when we do exercise that authority, we are to be the sole lawmaking organ for that capital city, to exercise exclusive legislative jurisdiction. Now, over the last 52 years since the D.C. Home Rule Act of 1973 was enacted, we have outsourced that authority to D.C.'s local government. Regardless of the intentions that went into that, we can see that it hasn't worked out well. Whether you call it a failure to supervise the D.C. government by Congress, fair accusation, I suppose, or whether you call that just a failure to act appropriately by the D.C. government, or a combination of the two, and I think that's fair too. We've ended up in a situation in which I think few members of Congress, few members of the House or Senate, cannot say that they haven't experienced personally, through family members, through staff, probably all of the above, the effects of D.C. crime. The fact that it's been getting so much worse over the last few decades, we've seen this city sliding into deeper levels of chaos and lawlessness. Last year, this city recorded more homicides than at any point over the last 2 decades. And carjackings have doubled. You've got families, workers, local residents, and tourists from all over the country who have experienced this. And in many cases, people have become targets who work here, not just in the city, but in some cases on Capitol Hill itself. President Trump was able to see what every American could see if they had eyes to see it and an opportunity to witness it, which is that this is out of control. And I want to commend President Trump for doing what he did, because in just a few weeks' time, we've seen real results. Once he deployed the National Guard and federal law enforcement to help, in just 3 weeks, we've seen violent crime cut nearly in half, burglaries down 48%, car thefts down 36%. That's what real leadership does. It's what real leadership looks like. Now, back to the beginning of the story, where we went back in time and remembered what the Constitution does and does not require, and where our capital has existed in the past. Let's remember why that authority was given to Congress to begin with. Those who framed our Constitution and wrote it, drafted it, and ultimately ratified it, understood the reluctance on the part of the founding generation to place our nation's capital inside of another state. They didn't want any one state to have an outsized influence on how our national government would work. And they knew that was always a risk, as long as it remained in Pennsylvania or New York or any other state. That's why they created the authority under the so-called Enclave Clause, Clause 17 of Article 1, Section 8. They wanted any seat of government that we might establish to be immune from the vicissitudes of a local government, particularly if policy choices were preferred by that local government in a way that were inconsistent with the national will. That's why Congress is in charge of making D.C.'s laws. So look, if we can reform the home rule status, we can give that a try. But we have to remember this is authority that is ours. It's been delegated unwisely in my view. If we can reform that, then let's do it. And President Trump's action is an important first step in that direction. But to the extent that that experiment is not able to work out, then we've got to be ready to do what needs to be done and undo home rule. Ultimately, it is the 100 senators and the 435 representatives who were in charge of making law and policy, because this city is different. This is not just a local city, not just a city with a local constituency. This has a national constituency. And if crime is a problem here, we have to own it. It's ours to own. And I applaud President Trump for taking this important first step in that direction. And looks like
Senator Mike Lee, Republican Utah, addressed concerns about the growing crime and dysfunction in Washington, D.C., suggesting that the city's home rule, which allows it to operate with a degree of independence, may need to be undone. He began by thanking Senator Cornyn for organizing the event and expressing gratitude to Angela for sharing her harrowing personal story, which brought attention to the city's escalating challenges. Lee painted a stark picture of the nation's capital, contrasting its renowned beauty with the increasing levels of lawlessness that have taken hold in recent years. While Washington, D.C. boasts stunning architecture, grand buildings, and beautiful landscaping, Lee emphasized the irony that these same landmarks now coexist with crime scenes. This juxtaposition, he argued, signals that something has gone terribly wrong. Reflecting on the origins of Washington, D.C. as the nation's capital, Lee reminded the audience that the Constitution does not explicitly mandate the existence of a national capital in the city. Instead, it grants Congress the authority to designate a location, which it did by statute. He highlighted that this authority, under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution, uses the word may, not shall, meaning that Congress has the discretion to choose a national capital. Importantly, this clause also grants Congress exclusive legislative jurisdiction over the city, allowing it to govern Washington, D.C. without interference from any state. However, since the passage of the D.C. Home Rule Act in 1973, local governance has been handed over to D.C.'s elected officials, a move Lee suggests has led to increasing challenges. Lee implied that whether through a failure to supervise or inadequately addressing the city's issues, the consequences have been evident in rising crime rates. He pointed out that many members of Congress, their staff, and their families have felt the impact of the city's lawlessness firsthand. The statistics Lee presented painted a grim picture. Washington, D.C. had recorded more homicides in the past year than at any point in the last 2 decades, and carjackings had doubled. These troubling trends have not only affected local residents but also visitors, workers, and even those on Capitol Hill. Lee acknowledged that President Trump had recognized the severity of the situation and acted decisively by deploying the National Guard and federal law enforcement to assist in addressing the crisis. Within weeks, the city saw dramatic reductions in violent crime, burglaries, and car thefts, which Lee credited to strong leadership and swift action. Lee then shifted to a historical context, discussing the reasons behind the constitutional provision granting Congress control over the nation's capital. He explained that the framers of the Constitution wanted to ensure that the capital would not be unduly influenced by any one state. This was particularly important to prevent local governments from enacting policies that might conflict with the national interest. Lee stressed that the Constitution's architects were cautious about placing the capital in a location that could be susceptible to local political pressures. Returning to the present, Lee called for a re-evaluation of D.C.'s home rule status. While he suggested that reforming the system might be worth considering, he made it clear that the authority ultimately lies with Congress. If the current experiment with home rule continues to fail, Lee indicated that Congress must be ready to reclaim full control over the city. He concluded by commending President Trump's leadership and reaffirming that Washington, D.C. is not just a local city but the seat of national government, and as such, its problems must be addressed by those who represent the nation as a whole.